Today we start another project, and if we were in class, we'd be reading this introduction, having different students read different paragraphs. But it's all me today, so I'll read the introduction, and or you can read it yourself on the packet, which should be linked in Schoology. So here's the kind of the premise. This summer you turned 14. As you blew out the birthday candles and as the smoke drifted away, your parents announced, "You're adopted!" Sorry, but we hadn't wanted to tell you till now because you weren't old enough to handle the truth. You sat there looking at the cake, the gifts, at their faces, finally down at your feet. Thoughts raced in your mind. You just didn't know what to think, except, "My life has been a lie." Then they said, "You'll meet your father this summer. He lives in Australia and can't wait to spend a week with you." The following day dawned sunny and mild. You boarded a great big plane with a couple hundred others. You listened to the announcements of what to do in case of an emergency. You looked around, the big luggage rack, the magazines in the back of the seat, the large older woman sitting to your left. You looked out the window as the plane taxied down the runway and the captain thanked you for flying with them today. He had that calm, in-charge voice as he said, "Enjoy your flight. We will arrive in approximately 9 hours." A couple of hours in, the flight attendant brought around drinks and a bag of peanuts, which was a welcome distraction from the "I'm adopted" thoughts and "What is my dad like?" The clouds ahead grew a little dark. Rain, perhaps. The lady to your left was snoring contentedly after having chewed down her snack and guzzled her Pepsi. The captain came on the intercom. "We are going to ascend to avoid some turbulence we are encountering." The plane began to rise, but as it did, it shook slightly. You looked at the window and were surprised to see how quickly the sky had been black with pounding rain. The wind swirled and the plane began to be buffeted this way and that. The captain came on again in that same calm tone. "Please stay in your seats and remain calm. We're experiencing a little..." Before he could finish the sentence, the plane pitched to the left and then to the right and started to fall like a dove with a broken wing. People around you began shrieking, "Oh, we're going to die!" Some left their seats and tried moving toward the exits, but most, with white knuckles, clenched the armrest. The large woman to your left snored ever so contentedly, likely dreaming of her next plane snack. Suddenly, the plane smashed into the water as people were tossed about. Some opened the emergency exits and began to pile out. Some held their purses like life preservers, and others found flotation devices. You were near the emergency exit and were among the first out holding a flotation device. You were hit from behind as a huge wave swept over the plane. Everyone bobbed in the ocean. You looked back to see the plane disappear under a second wave. You were swept further out and lost sight of the others. Sometime in the night, your feet hit something. Sand. It was land. You crawled to the beach with your mind racing. Is this Australia? How many other survivors made it to land? Was there any shelter? What about wild animals out there? Little did you know it then. You had landed on a heretofore undiscovered land. And the weeks to follow, you would learn much about the place. But you would be seen as the leader, for you are the first of the survivors to shore. Your task is to set up a life in society here, but also seek rescue by putting everything you know into a message in a bottle. I think it's kind of a fun scenario to say, hey, if I landed on an imaginary land and I could make it anything I wanted it to be, what kind of land would it be? Would it be a small island in the Caribbean somewhere with coconuts and palm trees? Would this be a harsh Arctic type of place? Would it be a huge region with lots of different climates and environments? Would it be something that you could easily make into like a paradise for you? Or is this a harsh, dangerous environment? And not only is this, so I don't know if I've stated it yet, but the actual project is to make a map of this land that you've found yourself on. And I love the creativity aspect of it, because you can take it so many different directions with the naming of the different places, the different climates, the different regions, the drawing aspect of it. Also, you're going to create government and laws that you're going to write about, and that might be reflected in the landforms and what you do. Let's look at a couple examples here quick. Here's one that did the classic burn off the edges. Maybe got lost a little bit of the land in the process there, but that's very nice. Here's another one. And here's another one. Okay, so when you start drawing your basic shapes of your land, I don't know if there's any technique to it other than draw lightly so you can change it. And it's probably nice to fill the large majority of the paper. Now, some features that people maybe aren't normally thinking about are, well, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Let me just draw a shape here. It's just important to get something on the paper, and then from there, maybe, okay, so there's our shape. One of the features that's exciting is a peninsula. So you think of Florida, it really sticks out. You also have Gulf, so this is like the Gulf of Mexico. Here we have another little peninsula jutting out. A lot of irregularity in the shape. Then another thing, of course, are islands. So this to me looks like a nice place to put a little island, not too far off the mainland. Be a good place for a bridge maybe. If you want to make an island chain, you make a number of these. And that almost makes an interesting little gulf there also. Other things are lakes, so we want some real big bodies of water somewhere. I'm going to put a great big lake right out here. Makes that area pretty interesting. And then rivers, big rivers can really cut up your, and it helps for the rivers to just start in the middle and work their way out to the salt water. It'd be kind of the typical way that these things happen. So we might have these meander around. They tend to really bend. They're not really straight usually. Actually, I think it looked better coming into there, off to this point. And maybe we have another river flowing out this way. And the rivers tend to start out small here, and as they come down, they get wider. There's maybe other sources of smaller streams join into them. Things like that. Mountain chains are really, I feel like this would be a really good area for a mountain chain. And let's just kind of indicate where we're going to put it right now. Maybe there'll be a little pass in the mountain chain here. And we're kind of at a 3/4 view. We're not looking straight down on the images like the mountains. And so as you go through here and kind of, if you're happy with the shape, start to kind of refine the edges of this, giving it little broken spots and variety, along the coast here. Just changing this up a little bit. And So that's the basic shapes, and it's just to get us going. And again, you can always erase or add. Let's say I don't like this stretch. Maybe I want it to look more like this. We want to add a legend to our map, and you can see this is a very old school legend. Here we see forests and lakes. Canyons are going to be indicated by this line, and then little vertical lines down off of it. Roads are going to be dots. Rivers are this line. Mountains look like this. Hills like this. So you want to figure out what images you want and then create a legend. This castle, they have a symbol there. I kind of prefer actually an artistic drawing of like a little castle, but you can do it either way. You can go with the symbol or the castle. Here's a more modern legend, which is really packed with all kinds of symbols. Again, not my preference to use this kind of thing. I like a little church that you draw in yourself. Makes it more artistic, a little less map oriented, but your choice which way you want to go with that. So when you draw a legend, it can be a square up here. I kind of like going with the old map form. So you start out with your square. And bring like 2 circles out this way. Curve this a little more maybe, and you have this old scroll type effect, and then you make lines on here, sort of indicate the direction of that. And then let's say that this is your mountain symbol, and then you write mountains on there. As a chief developer, you're being asked to determine the path the settlement will take. Will you have wildlife preserves, state parks, zones for agricultural, commercial? Are you encouraging population growth from within or without? Do you want to put restrictions on the number of children and immigrants? So this is kind of talking about zoning, and which is not something that probably happens in real primitive type societies, might not make. But let's just go ahead and do this. Say this is partway down the path of your development of your country. You look at this and say, where do you want people to settle? What do you want to have wildlife areas? If we have mountains over here, this is probably more remote in the interior. We know that people like to settle out on peninsulas and near the water and shipping here. We might have shipping ports. Here is indicated by little ports. This is just all very sketchy. We'd make this more detailed, but maybe we would want another shipping port over here. And so from these ports, you tend to have highways, and so maybe you indicate some of these highways, and then you show some of the bigger settlements, whatever you want these settlements to look like. I would have to figure out what kind of symbols I'm going to use or design I'm going to create for that. But a cluster of houses maybe to indicate your city. The city eventually might have a name. Riceburg, right? So the zoning, let's make a big state park out in here, and maybe I'll indicate that by doing a dotted line out through here. And maybe this is restricted, no development can happen in here. And we're going to call this wildlife preserve. Okay. And again, just see this as me being sketchy, but we get much more neat and detailed with this if we were doing a lot of this, maybe we'd have a highway coming out of this right up into the lake area. Maybe you have lake resorts. Maybe there's a highway over to here. Maybe these resorts are symbolized by smaller cabin-like structures or something scattered around the lake. So we got a wildlife preserve. Maybe maybe we need some farming area and say, hey, this is going to be farming only. Maybe right over to this side of it, I'm going to use the same dotted line and say that this is, let's just say farm use to make it simpler. And over here we might end up showing like some squares of land, trying to indicate farm fields. Maybe we try to indicate this with a symbol, an overly exaggerated big barn, or something like that. So when we go to label things, I've already labeled sort of what they are. It's just for informational use, but it's not real artistic. So the most important thing you're to label is name and label. Your name. What's the name of your country? Now notice that I put down 3 really light lines here, parallel, and make nice basic guidelines for the writing. Now if I want to make this artistic, you want to make this double thick. You definitely want this one to be double thick, and find out what style you want to use. You know, are you going for old school, or are you going modern and clean, or are you just going for straight up, I don't know, professional looking? Always like old school myself, just kind of feels like old maps to me. So you start to do that kind of thing, and then clean that up as you get happy with it. You can add all kinds of little features on that, curly cues, if that looks good to you. Okay, so that's labeling that. Out here, this was going to be wildlife preserve, and we just try to initially keep everything in the guidelines, wildlife, and we'd put preserve down here. It's almost like there's lines going this way also. You want all of them running like that, not one going like this and the one like this. You don't want cockeyed, so to speak. So that's labeling things. The other thing we want to do is outline. Now, if you have, most of you aren't going to have a set of big and small markers, but this one's, the F means it's fine, this B means it's bold, and I can do some bold outlining on this. You can simply accomplish the same thing with a black or brown, whatever color pencil color you go for here. You go over it once, go over it darkly. If that's not pronounced enough, go over it again and really make that stand out. This kind of gets into colored pencil techniques, which we'll talk more about in a little bit, but this is kind of fading that out into the water. Oh, that's making your water brown. Might not be the greatest idea with that, but let's see. Outlining with a pen, that would be just coming along the outline of your country and getting that really heavy-duty outline. Okay. So now we see this very bold outline for the country, but then when we go inland, like to a river or road and these other things, I think, you know, ideally it looks best for just about everything to be outlined, but we get into these more delicate lines. Let's say I was happy with this building. I'm not, but let's say it's finished and we're putting in the outline of it. So that kind of thing is, and see, we detailed that, and sometimes it's fun to actually do some more pen and ink work. You can use a ballpoint pen for this also, if you have any just typical ballpoint pens. This water symbol of like ripples coming out is a real good one for making things appear, the water appear different than the ground. One of my favorite colored pencil techniques is shading real dark and then fading it lighter as the need calls for. So out here in this water area, it's nice for that to be quite bold, and then as it goes out into the water, quickly fade into total white or just a lighter blue. If you ever want to err on one side with your colored pencil, you want to err on the side of too light, because we can always go back in and bump up the contrast later, but we can't erase it like you would in colored pencil. So neatness, coloring lightly, but then having areas of dark colored pencil application are really key for good colored pencil work. Contrast between the colors that you do too. Like if I go right over here and I take brown and I make it exactly the same value as this, they're going to blend together. So keeping the land lighter or darker than the water is good, or of such a different color, that might help. The other thing is color mixing. If you want your water to take on some different effects or qualities, doesn't hurt to just put in a little green there, just blending that in lightly, and that's easy to do. The other thing is, like, let's say I've got a desert area out here that I want to shade in. Let's say I'm keeping it pretty light brown, and then in that, if I want that to be real warm, you can just lightly add a little yellow. You could add a little bit of orange as well if you really want to get complicated and have three. But generally speaking, mixing two colors is safer than going two. The last steps is you going to write a paragraph about the government and a paragraph about the laws of your country. Now, ideally, you've been thinking about this along the way, because it actually impacts the buildings and the structures in your world. Let me read government. As the founding father of this country, you're being asked to draft a form of government to settle disputes and give guidance to the people. Write a paragraph about your form of government, which could range from anarchy, Wild West style, which is kind of like each man for himself, dictatorship, constitutional republic, that's what the U.S. has, a prophetic leader, that's kind of what the Israelites had when Moses guided them out of Egypt. Feudal kingdoms, that would be like King Arthur and the Knights. Socialism. And I was saying these things will impact the look of your land. Like if you have feudalism, you're going to see lots of castles and a lot of build-up, because you got warring between different countries, or if it's warring tribes like the Native Americans, you're going to see a warlike people, and that might be reflected in how they design their buildings or the placement of their settlements. Laws. What rights or freedoms are most important to you in the land? What things are people not allowed to do? What happens if they break the law? Do you have a sheriff or a dungeon? And how are these things funded? So do you have taxes? Do you have donations? How's that work? So it's kind of fun to think about, what you think the ideal is, or just what the results of certain laws and governments are. So don't forget to write a paragraph each about laws and government.